In Trinidad and Tobago, more persons have addictions than diabetes. That's more than 10% of the population. It is difficult to understand why addicts go to such lengths and destroy their lives. For the past 15 years, on Dependency has been treating with issues surrounding addiction in Trinidad and Tobago on the radio. Now, it's come to television.
Welcome to Dependency TV. I'm Garth St. Clair.
And I'm Natasha Nunez St. Clair.
Today we'll be dealing with addiction, crack cocaine specifically. And joining us on set, we have Dr. Yancy Ralston and Mr. Michael Hamilton, and they are both fellows of the Royal Society of the Arts of the United Kingdom.
Now we begin with the story of how on Dependency began, with the story of Garth St. Clair. Take this journey with us.
My journey started in Coquille Village in San Fernando, the eldest of 3 children, a brother and a sister, my mother and father, and it would be considered now the politically correct thing to be a dysfunctional home. My mom was a very strong lady, and she tried her best to keep us together, despite the fact that my father, seemed to be a playboy of sorts. Hearing them fighting all the time, sometimes 2 in the morning, sometimes 3 in the morning, during the day, we couldn't understand what was going on. All we knew is that, mommy and daddy were always most of the time fighting. There was hardly a time when I could recall that we had laughing moments. They were few and far between. It was hard to be jolted out of your sleep with, mom and dad quarreling and then have to go back to sleep to get up to go to school. I remembered, I think what was the last straw, I was one morning, I woke up in time when he came home. As usual, mom confronted him and I saw a right hand flush to her face. He hit her right hand and threw her down. That's a sound I will never forget. Yancy, tell us, in domestic abuse, what role would it play with regard to predisposition to addiction?
Well, we are all a product of our environment, but in terms of addiction, there are a number of factors that determine how you become as an adult in later life and the things that affect you. I mean, in your instance, you heard the sound of your father hitting your mother, and that must have affected you in some way. In terms of the addiction, people turn to substances as a means of comfort. There are also people who are genetically predisposed to have addictive personalities. So I know if you're looking for the reason why, there are a number of reasons that would have impacted on your life.
Michael, what are the preventative factors that may have existed that maybe he overlooked or his family may have overlooked in terms of his journey as a young adult?
The preventative factors whilst he was a child.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what children need, don't we? Children need love, children need stability, children need to feel safe. And if he was a child that didn't have that, then that would have an impact on him. And one of those impacts could have been to predispose him to problematic behaviour later on. There has been some research, I'm not an expert on this, but there has been some research in Michigan in the USA where they've done brain scans of children who were exposed to domestic violence. And what they noticed was that there was a change as they went into their teenage years in their hippocampus.
Yes.
And the change in their hippocampus might have predisposed them and predisposes them to problematic behaviour, including problematic drug use later on. And so there is some kind of research around that. But we do know, as Yancy says, that if children don't have the things that they need, that it predisposes them to problems in later life.
So, Michael, for the uninitiated, what is the hippocampus?
The hippocampus, well, that's the part of the brain that kind of deals with our emotional cells and that kind of deals with emotions.
Great.
And you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say actually that one of the things that support people through their processes in life is building emotional resilience, so the way that they respond to circumstances that they've endured.
Thank you, Yancy and Michael. Now let's hear a little more of Garth's story.
Yeah, there were some things that was said during the time my mother and father were arguing with each other that really affected me, that made me feel that I wasn't part of the family, let me just put it that way. You know, that I was the, as we call it, the black sheep of the family.
The house is just at the back of this house here. As a child, he was miserable.
I was more attracted to sight, sound, culture, music.
Where the other two siblings would be quiet, you could get them at home, not Garth. He was always more extrovert, always outgoing, always mixing with the boys.
My brother was more, was closer to my father than I was. I was closer to my mother, you know, but ironically I resemble my father. So it was a kind of pulling and tugging between both parties. I didn't know who to believe. I just didn't care no more. I just wanted to bury myself in sport and culture.
He was the one that always got into trouble. He was the one that would get licks.
Now, Michael, you work with young people. Mm-hmm. What are the impacts of constant negativity from your family and your loved ones in your youth?
In order to develop resilience, in order to have a strong sense of yourself, in order to have aims for your life, to believe that you can do things, you need people constantly reinforcing the good about you. You need to learn what's good about you. And if what you have is you have people who are constantly just telling you what is bad about you, you don't get those messages to build that resilience. The other thing that I noticed, and the word that I really noticed from the clip was the idea of belonging. Yeah. You know, and that Garth had nowhere to belong. He wasn't. Yeah. He didn't feel that he was a part of that family. Yeah. And so that's the other thing, of course, that helps us to build resilience, is knowing that we belong somewhere, that no matter what happens in the world, that we have a safe place to come to, which is gonna make us okay. And when you don't have that safe place, you don't have that sense of belonging. It's another reason why you don't build the resilience that you need in later life.
Yeah. And can I also just come in there, in looking at the clip where Garth's aunt talks about he got licks and she says it with a smile. Yes. That's a sort of contradiction of terms, because she's saying it in a loving way, but the mere fact that you're being beaten is a negative. Mm-hmm. You know, it must impact on you. Mm-hmm. And for young people, it sends out mixed signals, because on one hand you're saying, I love you, but you give them the backhand at the same time. Does love equate the slap? So in your mother and father's relationship, there's that contradiction. You had said off camera about, your mom stayed with your dad even though she was being beaten. Yes. But if she had a similar experience to you as a child, where she was being beaten and loved, she's gone into adulthood with that dichotomy, that sort of, contradiction.
Is it why, Yancy, that some people tend to actually stay in a relationship, even though it's abusive? And how there are some households, that single parent households, and could it be misdirected anger too, because a mother under stress, having to provide for a family without her father around? Could that also
there are a number of reasons. If you think about it, in life we all work in and out of feeling well, feeling unwell, emotionally and mentally. We're not always strong. We're not always able to have the emotional resilience that we do need. And we react. So things happen in life and we react to those situations. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying there, it does actually make sense. You may stay in an unhealthy relationship where there's abuse, because one, you may not feel strong enough, but you may actually think somewhere that person still does love me, because your aunt said it with love, the fact that you got licks, but she said it with a big loving smile.
Yes. And because that was the solution back in the day, for
Still
everything.
now, today.
Still now, because there was this
Yeah.
this clip on social media with a mother beating her daughter.
I saw that one with a machete.
With a machete.
Yes, yes.
And people saying it's because she loved her daughter. She was beating her that way.
More importantly, it's her daughter has come onto social media now and talking about how much her mother loved her.
She did?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes.
And so the single incidence of anything happening or the single occurrence of any particular problem doesn't necessarily predispose anybody to anything. Yes?
Yeah.
And so some people get beaten, and I've heard them say in later life, it was the thing that made me,
That's right.
it's the thing that made me strong.
Yep.
I'm going to do it to my children because it was a good thing to have done.
Yeah.
Other people who have exactly the same experience will say that it's the thing that destroyed me.
Traumatized. I
And
had
that
one experience
traumatized,
like that
yes.
as well.
And
Yeah.
so it's the same as domestic abuse in a way, is that we know that these things are not good for children. Yeah, we know that childhood is an opportunity to build a foundation, an emotional foundation, a social foundation, an educational foundation for people who are going to grow into adults.
Yeah.
And we want to put into that menu as many good and positive experiences as possible, because we know that when we do that person grows stronger, more effectively, and more able to deal with the world.
Thank you, Michael and Yancy. And as Michael mentioned, that feeling of belonging that Garth was lacking, let's look at where he found that sense of home in the army.
Well, Garth was always into sports and even music. In school here, they had a band. So he was involved in that. Other than that, it's just whatever, school activities, sports, that kind of thing. He was into all those things, even in junior sec. Very athletic.
I buried myself in that so that maybe, now that I think about it, maybe it was a chance for me to be away from home as much as possible. Because when my father left home, my mother now having to take care of all of us. Somehow it happened by a miracle. As soon as my father left, her father visited us, that was my grandfather, and it's as if he knew he was going to pass away. So he handed over a contract. He was a contractor at Point Epi at the time, Texaco, when they were here, and he handed over that contract to her. She was one of the first female contractors in Texaco. I, of course, didn't leave school with full passes, and I became her driver essentially, and I started working in the oil field with her. My mother, at times when she gets angry, she would refer, "You're stupid just like your father. You're worthless just like your father. You're dotish, your head big just like your father." It started to affect me because I felt that I was being targeted by my mother because I maybe resemble my father. So after a while, I felt that too much attention was being paid to me, and I was being made to feel I was this terrible person. So I decided I was going to join the army. In March 1982, I decided I was going to do the army exam. I didn't tell my mother anything. I didn't say a word to anybody. I did the exam, and I passed the exam. The 14th of April 1982, I was called to the regiment. The night before, I started packing, and my mother asked me, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to join the army." And she laughed. She didn't believe me. And the next morning I was up, and she walked up behind me. And she said, "You serious?" I said, "Yes, I'm serious." And I hugged her. And I will never forget that morning. She stood by the door and she looked at me walking up. And I keep saying to myself, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did. I looked back and she was standing by the door crying. And I started crying walking up that road. So when I reached Port of Spain, Independence Square, and I saw all these young men gathering, I felt like, well, I'm leaving a safe haven now. I'm going into territory that I don't know about. And then this huge green truck pulled up. And this corporal jumped off, this lance corporal. Well, now we know that he had one stripe. And I remember him jumping from the front of the truck. He had big yellow armband mark RP on it. The Lance Corporal jumped out the back and started backing from before he hit the ground. Big set of noise on Independence Square and have everybody shuffling like, and I felt good. You know, when these young guys around me mumbling under their breath and the hell he feed his boy and talking to people so and I felt good. And I'm saying, but something wrong with me or something, but it was actually somebody paying attention. And when we reached Tetron Barracks, that truck, I remember I was looking through the back of the truck and they were taking us into this forested area now. Now it's the first time we go in Tetron. Huge trees and a long winding road, truck just going round corner, and I'm seeing these huge trees just leaving us in the distance and the sun coming up. I felt like I was going into another world. But strangely enough, it felt good that I was leaving one world behind and going into another world.
Now, Yancy, what are the red flags that you picked up during that last part of the story?
I mean, for me, the thing that stuck out the most was Garth saying that he referred to his home as leaving a safe haven. And prior to that, you spoke about it in such a negative way. So somewhere in there, you realized there was love amongst the negativity and the beatings.
Speaking about finding a safe haven, we always hear about young men finding that love in a gang or on the block. What is commonplace there with what you've heard?
I mean, the thing that I noticed about your story, Garth, was how your emotional resilience was actually kicking in. Yeah, you were looking for spaces outside of your home all of the time where you might be safer than you were at home. Your teacher talked about sports, music groups, all sorts of activities away from home which were keeping you safer, you thought, than you were at home, ending up with the army. And in terms of gangs, is that I think that what we know is that these young people are also looking for a safer place to be than the place where they feel unwanted, unloved, unoccupied. And it's just that they're turning their heads to the wrong spaces. The psychologist Carl Rogers, if I could kind of mention something from a book, please. But the psychologist Carl Rogers says that we all have within us the internal material that is always trying to take us to where we need to go. Yeah? And our emotional resilience is a part of that. Our system will always try to take us to what we need. And if what we need is belonging, our system will take us to belonging. It's just sometimes it will be the wrong place. We'll end up in more dangerous places than the places that we're running from.
And in our next clip from Garth's story, we hear about how he was introduced to crack cocaine by someone he trusted in the military.
When he joined the army, everybody was proud of him because it's the first person in the family that was in that career.
Every recruit gets a chance, or sometimes will get a chance to be what you call a squad leader or section leader. I knew I was going to be a squad leader at some point.
Garth would have been one of the people who kind of stood out in the platoon because he showed a lot of potential. Not just in sports, because we play basketball together and all that. We take on all the platoons, even and everything. As a matter of fact, our platoon was about the best platoon that they had.
He was always highly energized about being in the defense force. He wanted to be a soldier. So it was very easy to train him. And he was all about being physical.
One day it happened where our squad leader, we went out to do drill, and when we was coming back in, one of the instructors noticed that he put on his shoulder tightness upside down. So the TTR was upside down. And I was right on spot to see that. So the instructor asked him, "You just turn over the whole regiment," and ripped the chevron off his shoulders. And says, "Where's St. Clair?" I said, "Right here." Instructor, he said, "Come." And he put on the white chevron on me.
Normally,
They might give it that for a week and pull it off of his shoulder, but he had it for the longest time.
During training, they would change squad leaders as time go down. If a recruit doesn't get right, the corporal will come and vigorously rip off the tape of him to place on somebody else.
You know, he always had that thing about him.
When they made Garth a squad leader, Garth was a squad leader from the beginning of training until the ending.
When she heard, she started getting news about how I was going during the training. You know, people started telling her. Well, she thought, as a neighbor told me, boy, your mother cried for days.
Sometimes when people are placed in areas of responsibility, like Garth was, he took it very serious. And he took everything extremely serious.
And you could have seen he would have made something of himself because he was shooting. When I say shoot, I mean like moving forward.
We always kind of keep an eye on him because he was always, you know, out front. It's good to be fit as a recruit because life is easier when you're fit. So he was doing pretty well.
And my first company was Delta Company. We stayed in Tetrand Barracks for a while, and then Delta was going on the honor guard. Young soldiers weren't allowed to go on the honor guard. Once you had less than 5 years service, you couldn't go on the honor guard. That was the Prime Minister and President Guard. So we were transferred to Bravo Company. They said we had to go to Tobago. No, we didn't want to go to Tobago. I mean, I just passed out, you sending us Tobago. But as they said, you sign up, you go where they tell you to go.
We went to Tobago to serve for a lengthy period. When we worked Tobago, he took part in basketball there. He even trained a team across in Tobago.
The tour of duty was coming to an end, and we were coming back to Trinidad. I went to try to get on the PTI course. They say this for old soldiers, you must have 5 years and more service. So we just say, St. Clair, I think they will take care, you know, because as I say, you just have 2 years service.
It struck me so strange, and I found I was so lucky to get on a PTI course so early in training.
He did the PTI course, which he also excelled on, because the PTI course is all about fitness. And he was fit. Loved to play basketball, so it had a basketball element. He could run, wanted to swim, he could swim. So we had all elements of that on the course, to which he excelled.
That's one thing with the Defence Force. They don't ever hold you back once you have a skill. They see that you excel, they will push you forward. And I broke that glass ceiling because I said you had to be 5 years and over before you became an instructor, a physical training instructor. But I stood out and I became a physical training instructor.
Going to Defence Force headquarters would have been after he had done his PTI course and was selected to be on the PTI staff. Right? You can imagine how you would have felt that some of the people that would have trained you, you're working together with them now.
The PTI staff was almost like the hallowed unit of the Defence Force. They had their own commander, we had everything, you know, we had our own quarters and everything. We wore white. And I settled in there for about 3 years until I decided that I would study for exam. So because I wanted to become now a commissioned officer. Wanting to become an officer was part of the ambition. I really think that I could have gone to that level of leadership. But to achieve that, I had to have 5 subjects. I didn't have 5 subjects. So I decided that I was going to go back to school. Now that would have been, I didn't know that would have been such a task because as a PTI I had to be up. And by that time I was in charge of training youth camp. And then from youth camp we would come back to the base. I was really tired, I was running whole day. And then the PTI course, the same PTI course that I was trained on, now I'm an instructor on that course. So now I have to go report to the Gene Pierre complex, that's when the PTI course was. And so it was difficult to study at night. Morning time I would wake up like 2 in the morning, try to study until about 4 and then change, get ready for when the guys come in and we go Shagama's youth camp. And one morning, while I was sleeping on my books, I guess, I felt a nudge. And when I raised my head, I saw this soldier standing there. And he said to me, "You're sleeping on yourself, soldier." I said, "Tired." He said, "Okay, don't worry yourself." He said, "I would check you tomorrow. And I'll give you something that will keep you up in the night." I said, "Boy, anything that keep me up in the night, I welcome it because, you know, I want to get these subjects." and kept his promise. He showed up the next day. He was waiting by the almond tree, that famous almond tree on the base, and I sat in the car, and he dipped in his map pocket and he pulled out this thing wrapped in foil. So I said, okay, what is that? He said, well, there's a new thing on the scene. He said, call this crack. I said, okay. I said, so that will keep him up in there? He said, hold on. And so I was introduced to that. Then he showed me a brandy bottle, a miniature brandy bottle. It looked kind of dirty. He said, you could put it here and you could light it here. He came well prepared. I remember taking the first hit of that crack cocaine. And I just entered a different world from that first hit. A lot of guys fell by the wayside with that, I myself included.
Yancy, having looked at that clip and hearing the comments from the guys I worked with and members of my batch, they are more like me in the military.
Yeah.
Why didn't I just say no? After hearing how good I was and bringing back some of the memories now, why didn't I just say no?
I think that's a question you will have to answer yourself. But I understand why you're asking the question. And within particular types of environments, like the military, like the police services, those protective services, there seems to be some sort of culture where it has become the norm to use substances as support. So there's, a lot of alcoholism within the protective services in Trinidad and Tobago. So you have a lot of functioning alcoholics walking around in those services. And in some respects, I think, yes, that was your safe haven, but you used it for a purpose. You wanted to achieve. So I think you shouldn't just focus on the negative part of it. You actually went to use that substance for a purpose to help you to be a better Army officer.
Michael, why do some people make that choice that he made and others don't? What is the determining factor?
I think it's more complicated than that, because some people will make the choice and some people won't make the choice. Some people will smoke crack cocaine a couple of times and then put it down and say, I'm not doing that again. Other people will smoke it once and will not ever be able to put it down again. So it becomes a much more kind of complicated story about kind of addiction and why some people become addicted, why some people don't become addicted, why some people seem to be able to use things forever and to just put them down. And I don't think that we know all of the answers to that question.
At what point does it become a disease? Because we want people to treat addiction as an illness that can be treated. So at what point do we recognize that it is something?
I think it's when we're doing something that we don't have control of and that is interrupting the normal flow of our lives. Yeah. Yes? And so cigarettes, alcohol, coffee for some people, tea for other people. It's those things that we do which control which start to control themselves when they are done and which interrupt the flow of our ordinary lives. Yeah.
Yancy, low self-esteem.
Yes.
It doesn't make an individual easier susceptible to peer pressure and being offered that. So a young police officer, a young soldier or sailor find himself in that position, low self-esteem. What can it...
Not necessarily, because in your own story, you at that point in time, you weren't talking about having low self-esteem because you were excelling. You were given a number of opportunities and your colleagues were all singing your praises. So it is much more than just, the low self-esteem issue that was affecting you. And this is your story we're talking about here.
Part of this, Yancy, might be your ability to see those positive things which were happening. Because if we reflect right back at the beginning of your story, you said that one of your experiences was that the people around you were only telling you the negative things about yourself. And so perhaps at this time, even when you were excelling, you were getting white stripes before everybody else, you were becoming squad leaders and everything else in record times. You were teaching those people who were teaching you the day before. You had gotten to the point where look, I could even go back and do my 5 subjects. Yeah, that you were excelling at that time. And perhaps that's one of the things that happens to us when people tell us just the not so good things about ourselves, is that we start only hearing that about ourselves, even when there are amazing things happening.
You have lived that negative self-story.
On the military as a workplace, and how important it is for us to recognize that how vulnerable people can be, especially young people in a work environment.
I mean, one of the things that struck me again with your story is the fact that within the military, we know that, as I said, the drink and drug addiction is quite prominent there. And you have to remember that it's not only in military services, but people are predisposed to trauma experiences because you're going through war or whatever the experience is. So people are predisposed to trauma. People are coming there with their own emotional baggage from their home life, as you had, and they're coming into an environment that's different. So you're going into a place where the discipline is different. The people you're hanging out with, yes, you may be peers, but they may not be the people you would normally socialize with outside of that scenario. So you're coming into it's a new family of sorts, but an artificial family, and that can also have an effect on your emotional resilience, back to that point again, and how you cope with what's there. But one of the shortcomings within the army is the fact that maybe they aren't looking at mental health, the whole picture, including drink and drug addiction, in the way that it should. It's seen as something that happens to people over there, not in our space, because we are macho people, whether we're male or female, we are macho people. We're protecting our country and our kinfolk, and we're not susceptible. But actually, every single human being is susceptible to some period of mental unwellness or emotional unwellness.
Yancy, Michael, thank you all very much. This has been a very rewarding and informative session. Thanks again. Stay with us, folks, and Dependency TV will be back with a segment called News Addict.
Welcome to this special segment in the Iron Dependency TV program. I'm Corporal Silan Gilead with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. This segment, which we refer to as News Addict, shares information on developments, discussions, and issues taking place locally and internationally on addictions, treatment, and the culture around them. This week we look at cocaine and crack cocaine, both which are very dangerous and extremely addictive. Cocaine is a powerful drug contained in the leaves of the coca shrub, a plant grown primarily in the South American countries of Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. As history suggests, cocaine was first extracted from the coca leaves somewhere around 1855, and it quickly became a wonder drug as it helped reduce a number of ailments including asthma, digestive disorders, and as an anesthetic in minor surgeries. When the compound was extracted from the leaves and isolated, it was then mixed with other chemicals to form the white powdery substance which we know as cocaine. By the late 1800s, the US recognized its addictive qualities and made it illegal. It became expensive and was limited to the affluent in society. By the 1970s, the use of cocaine in its powder form was widespread, and eventually in the 1980s, a cheap alternative called crack cocaine was introduced. Crack cocaine essentially is a white powdery substance dissolved in water, mixed with baking soda, and heated to form solid chunks or rocks. The name crack was derived from the crackling sound heard when the rocks are being smoked. Whilst cocaine can be snorted or injected, crack is mostly smoked. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service largely became aware of crack cocaine's use in Trinidad and Tobago around the 1980s. While it's unclear as to who introduced it locally, the effects are quite evident, as there was a general increase in gang violence, shootings, and murder. After several legislative pieces, cocaine became an illegal narcotic under the first schedule of the then Dangerous Drug Act, Chapter 38 of 1991. This act has since been amended, the latest being Chapter 1125. Because of its location, Trinidad and Tobago has become a major transshipment point for dealers and traffickers. We are close to South America and a gateway to North America, Canada, the United Kingdom, and even Europe. The distance from Trinidad to Venezuela is only 756 kilometers from Iquitos or Cedros. There's a long history of narcotics and firearms being smuggled across these borders, and over time, other organized crime groups locally develop other routes and entry points into Trinidad and Tobago. The greater percentage of narcotics are transshipped to more lucrative markets in the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, and even Africa. Traffickers use sea cargo, air cargo, courier services, and even people. The drug is popular for users and pushers because of the cost factor. Cocaine in its powder form is expensive to buy on the streets. Crack is a much less expensive alternative and has become more accessible to people with less money to spend. For dealers, crack cocaine offers the ability to make more profits from pure cocaine, which can be mixed with additives to make crack cocaine, sometimes up to 3 times its weight or even more. Crack cocaine is more profit, a faster turnover, and a guaranteed clientele. The types of crime we now experience with the increase of crack and cocaine use, apart from drug-related offenses, are numerous. Property crimes such as larceny of dwelling house, burglary, and house breakings. Indirectly, violent crimes also occur, such as robbery, assaults, wounding, and even murder by users or members of the organized crime groups. That's all the time we have for today's News Addict. Next week in part 2, we look at the devastating impact crack cocaine has on people and communities.
Welcome back. Here's Street Value.
Welcome to the premiere episode of Street Value. I'm your host, Junine Edwards, and we're here in the community of Coquet. Let's see how drug abuse has affected them. I'm here with Mr. Cook. He's an elder in the community, and tell me a little bit about Coquet and Coquet Village.
I have been living in Coquet almost all my life. Now, if I would be letting out a big secret, but I've been living here almost 70 years now.
Wow.
Then to now has been a big difference. You know, it's more concrete and galvanized now.
So a lot of concrete and galvanized. And tell me a little bit about drugs and how drugs has impacted or affected your community.
There are drugs all over Trinidad and Tobago, maybe the world. But I don't think it has really affected the community in a negative way as such. Yes, we have had persons using drugs, but in the very much minority. And I don't think it has affected, it never affected me. I was around it at one time in my early days, my teenage days. And a lot of guys around here were on drugs. When I say drugs, marijuana.
All right, so I'm here with Mr. Stanley. So tell me a little bit about Coquet Village. How has drugs in general changed your community?
It had a drug come on the scene called Skylab. I don't know if people could remember Skylab. It's a drug that dropped somewhere down Cedros. And since that drug come on the scene, well, it was like free. We didn't have to pay for that. You know, that was like distributed And right after that, harder drugs come like cocaine. And there's who went on cocaine and who stay on marijuana,
Yeah.
Well, eventually, some of us came off of marijuana and some continue smoking the harder stuff, black cigarette into cocaine, and the situation get worse, And well, as we get older, the community start to deteriorate. Some leave, some migrate, some end up in prison. Quite a few of them end up in
prison. All right, so tell me how it is affected the community in a negative way then, if some people have ended up in prison and things like that?
Yes, some rebound, some come back and show good report, some rebound.
So I'm here with Miss Sheila, so tell me, how has Coquet been? Because I know you said you've been here for quite some time, right? How has the community changed?
Well, the community has changed a whole lot. Very nice houses we have, and we have built up areas. When I first came into Coquet, where we are right now, it was all gravel road. It was not paved at all. Right, and this area has built up a whole lot. A lot of strange people come into the area, but normally very nice people.
Very nice. All right, so tell me a little bit about how drugs has affected the community.
Oh yes, the younger generation. Yes, it has caused the disruptions in a lot of homes, destroyed a lot of lives, young people. And originally we never had people liming on the street corners and things like that, but with the invasion of drugs, yes, it has caused some disruptions to family life in this whole Coquet area.
And speaking about family life, how has drugs in fact affected you?
Oh my dear, I have very personal and painful experience of drugs and what it can do to your family. Yes. My son was on drugs, still is.
So what type of drug is he on? What drugs he takes?
Well, first he started with marijuana.
Okay.
And then graduated to cocaine and then crack cocaine. And now is the cocaine and alcohol.
Right. And you said he's not recovering. He's not a recovering.
No, I will not say. He has been into rehab, in and out rehab for 4 or 5 times.
Really?
Yes.
So, what did we learn on Dependency TV this evening?
Quite a bit. I think Yancy and Michael set us on the right path in terms of understanding that children need love. That although some parents may have the wrong impression of how to administer it, it is what builds the resilience to the pressures outside, to the peer pressure, to the other negative influences that may influence their lives.
Yep, and also the feeling of belonging and the calling of negative names and ascribing negative comments to a child in the home or children in the home can cause children to want to escape and go outside and look for that comfort on the outside of the home and never want to look back because of the pain that they feel at home. Yeah. So it's really important.
Yes, it is. Indeed, finding a home outside of home, away from home, can be a very dangerous thing. But thankfully for you, it was a positive, right?
Well, yes, it turned out to be positive, but it may not be positive for everybody.
Correct.
And that's the point we're trying to make here, is that not everyone will be lucky to take that journey and be able to survive it. So, folks, all of that misdirected anger, we need to identify where it's coming from and be careful how we deal with it. And remember, please be careful who you associate or align yourself with out there. It can cause you a life of misery and pain. This has been Dependency, reality TV at its best. Join us again for another episode right here on TV6.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us.